listeners. Today's episode is on Samuel R. Delany's 1968 novel Nova, which is a kind of spacefaring Captain Ahab, Grail quest / Treasure Island alike that also features tarot card imagery and reflections on technology as well as why people need archetypical images in their lives. Yeah, as we say a couple times on the podcast, this is like a 20 pounds of novel stuffed into like a 5-pound bag because the book's only like 240 pages. But needless to say, John and I have a great time talking about this one. Our conversation touches on basically like Samuel R. Delany's position in canonical science fiction, the use of tarot card imagery and grail quests, the way this novel approaches alienation and labor, and just how great it is, because this is a pretty great book. We had a great time talking about it. As we also mentioned, we're concluding our spring season, our spring semester, and we hope you'll join us for our 2666 read through, as well as everything else we got cooked up for the summer. So give us a follow on Blue Sky at the Infinite Library Podcast, or give us a follow on YouTube, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
And welcome to the last episode of the spring 2025 season. And what a long, strange trip it's been. I know I said that at the beginning of last episode, but I worked 30 hours of overtime last week, so I'm allowed to be a little confused.
Yeah, if you work more, you're allowed to repeat bits on the podcast.
Well, like you said, Ben, we're talking book that I picked for pod when we were planning back during the winter. And Samuel Delany.
Yeah.
A man who might need some introduction, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he definitely needs at least a little introduction.
He is a figure that has loomed large over my reading for a long time. When I started, I feel like the listeners probably have a decent understanding of kind of my path to kind of where we are right now in the show with literature. I read a lot of genre garbage when I was a kid. Eventually realized I wanted to read good books instead, but still maintained a lot of that affection for those genre trappings. Blah, blah, blah. We've been over it before. Delany is one of those guys that once you kind of breach the surface of what I'll just call like literary genre fiction.
Yeah.
He's someone who you hear about pretty quickly. But he's also kind of a tricky writer for a number of reasons. For me, part of the problem I had with getting into him was that there's not really like a one book. He's not like one of those authors where it's like, oh, you want to get into him, pick up this one.
Yeah.
I'd say the closest thing he has to that is Dahlgren. But Dahlgren is not like a book that you can just like casually pick up.
I will say, unless you're like a sicko like me and you're like, oh, 600-page, complicated, weird, experimental sci-fi novel, sign me up. And I read that one like first, which I don't think you should do, but that's definitely the one that he gets the most praise for.
Yeah, but, compared to a contemporary of his, Ursula K. Le Guin, who I think he had an interesting dialogue with, I think that they're authors who kind of were part of a similar moment in science fiction and had a lot of kind of back and forth with each other, both inside and outside of their fiction.
And we could say briefly that's kind of like 60s utopianism. There's a lot of social awareness. There's a lot of making like implicit interior things about gender, sexuality, and class consciousness, and like externalizing them through science fiction.
Well, it's the new wave. I'd say particularly like this book we're talking about today and the kind of this early phase of Delany's career that we're going to be probably more focused on as we talk through this book and him. It's the new wave of science fiction. So we've kind of passed the point of the quote unquote golden age of science fiction, your Isaac Asimovs, your Isaac C. Clarke's. We're into kind of a phase of science fiction where people are doing more interesting things with it in a literary sense. Delany is a big part of that. But to circle back to what I was saying, compared to Ursula K. Le Guin, who, people are, if you want to pick up her, people are generally going to tell you, oh, you should either read Earthsea or you should read
Dispossessed. Yeah.
Delany, despite being probably more prolific than Le Guin, he's written, I think, like at least 20 novels.
Oh, wow. I know he wrote a lot, but I didn't know how much.
And that's just his novels. I mean, he's written essays, critical compilations, short stories, memoirs. I don't know if he's written any plays, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
He's prolific, which can make it hard to kind of find like a point of entry for him. The other thing is that a lot of his work, he doesn't just work in the one genre. He's not just a groundbreaking science fiction author. He's also one of the most depraved gay pornographers of the last century.
Yeah, there is no taboo which he will not break. So
I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now. I'm looking at a list of his novels right now. I'd say if you clicked on any one of these at random, there is about, I would say, a 20 to 25% chance that it would be depraved gay pornography rather than groundbreaking science fiction, or in some cases, both.
Yes, at the same time. Yeah.
But that does make him, again, a little more intimidating. I definitely was something that when I first heard his name and was maybe a little more squeamish about erotic fiction, I found that to be a little off-putting. There's also the fact that he may or may not have been a member of NAMBLA at one point. Don't want to get into that.
Right. But you should, it's definitely something that should be mentioned. So.
Yeah. The 60s were a different time. But I mean, Delany is, despite kind of these eccentricities, we'll say, has been a very important voice for both, he's been an important gay and crucially a Black voice in science fiction in American letters for decades at this point. I struggle to think of an author kind of with his combination of identities who has the profile that he does, in this genre. And
I feel like is also willing to, confront taboos, break rules, just talk about stuff that I think most people would either metaphorize or talk about sort of, not directly. I feel like he's very much about like tackling things that are usually not addressed or, like, as I was saying earlier, mostly internalized.
Yeah. I mean, even as we get into discussing this book, this is definitely one, I think, in kind of our pre-show chatter, we were talking a little bit about how this book definitely is less horny than maybe I'm not going to say that we would have hoped, but I think both of us probably went into this thing wondering, like, is there going to be like a weird sex scene in this?
Especially since my only real familiarity is with Dahlgren, and at one point in that book, it sort of seems to go like, what are the weirdest sex scenes I could string together to make an overall thematic point? So I had my horny indicator out as I was starting the book.
Yeah. And, I don't know quite, this is, I think, his fifth novel. He's writing it in 1968.
Yes.
And, oh no, it's like his ninth novel. Jeez, man, people used to just write so much faster back then. Wow.
Yeah, John, when I was reading it, I'm like, this seems like an early, it seems like, one of the first books he wrote. And then I looked up his Wikipedia page and I was like, holy crap, this is his ninth novel. Like, yeah.
But what I was saying was that I don't know if he just didn't quite feel like he had reached a point in his career where he could really like let his freak flag fly yet, or if there was thematic reasons for kind of the sexuality to be a little more lacking here. But whatever, I think there are like sexual themes in this book, but they're like you said, but they're kind of veiled. I think that this is a book that's a lot of this book is about symbolism and kind of the way that humans place veils between like ourselves and reality.
Yeah.
And kind of the successive like reveiling or unveiling of things is a very important theme in this book. Ben, when we were talking about this before the show, you kind of referred to this as like 20 pounds of book in a 5-pound bag.
Yeah. He seems to have stuffed 20 pounds of book into a 5-pound bag, or like there's like themes for a much longer book and it's only like 240 pages and he's just stuffed it all in there. And it's all like, it's almost like overflowing. It feels like when you're reading it.
Yeah, which is something I frankly liked about it. And what I think I like a lot about the kind of new wave. This reminded me a lot of one of my favorite science fiction novels, The Star's My Destination by Alfred Bester, which was written, I think, 10, 15 years before this, like in the mid 50s. But is a book that's similar in terms of the way that it is kind of positing a future that it both is sketching out for you in this way that feels incredibly rich, but also doesn't get bogged down in like tons of exposition. It doesn't need to explain everything. It really lets your imagination kind of go wild in this way that, like you said, that overflowing quality is very much a product of the way that he constructs the setting and the world for this book, the way that he implies things. But again, it never gets into sort of this mode of just telling. There's always even when there's exposition, it's exposition that is done through the lens of character work. If someone gives an exposition dump, it's because they're the type of character. They literally have like a backstory that justifies like why they're doing an exposition dump. And it's probably because they went to Harvard.
Yeah, they're the one person to get a liberal education in the 31st century, an era of hyper specification is what he keeps or specialization, which is what he keeps this character keeps going on about. But yeah, he's basically given the character trait, we will say, of like over explaining stuff. So well, feels like we've meandered a little bit, but I guess what I wanted to hammer home before we really get into the book is the reason I came to you and I said I wanted to do a Delany was because I think one thing I appreciate about the show so far is you and I have both been on the same page in terms of making sure that we are highlighting lots of different kinds of authors. Yeah. People from different backgrounds, different races, sexualities, nationalities, and, Delany kind of occupying this very unique space, I thought would be an author who would provoke a lot of interesting discussion for us. On top of that, it gave me an excuse to finally read some Samuel R. Delany.
And Nova is a book that I really, really enjoyed, and I hope that you also liked it, Ben.
Yeah, as I was saying about you'd mentioned the 10 pounds of book in a 5-pound bag. I feel like it was there's a line in this book that we're going to get to where the character who over-explains says every novel is a product of its own time. Like, don't forget that. No matter how subjective or symbolic or surreal, it's still a product of its own time. And I felt like this coming out in 68, me knowing Delany was sort of cutting edge in terms of what he's talking about. I feel like you really got to see him kind of like experiment with the themes he's interested in, with the way of telling a story that avoids too much exposition dumping. And for me, it was like, it feels like reading science fiction that has like this sort of charge of like modernism, because there's different perspectives, there's different styles, there's a lot of symbolism, but it's not like as serious as modernism can be. And so I really liked it, and I found it super refreshing. And I was thinking about like, yeah, how genre can take on the charge of other, like we might say like high art experimentation, and vice versa, which is something we're definitely interested in on this podcast. So I could really see the modernism influence kind of, and I had a great time reading it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. The new wave, I think, is almost this like mini modernist movement, in that it's sort of this brief moment in the history of science fiction where, almost kind of in parallel to modernism, you kind of had, again, what's called the golden age. I don't think of it as the golden age, because I think that a lot of the books people hold up from that time actually are pretty bad.
Revisionism. Yeah,
you have this point where sort of the language of science fiction is sketched out by people like Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Clark, Heinlein, etc.
Yeah,
and there's kind of that classic imagery of science fiction, the kind of rocket ships with the Art Deco fins and things like that, flying saucers, little green men, and you have kind of the language of the genre kind of spring out of the culture. And then you get people like Delany, like Le Guin, like other people working in the new wave, a lot of whom are approaching science fiction, but are also big fans of other types of writing.
Yeah.
They're not just science fiction nerds. They're not just into the science fiction scene. And so they blend these influences, and create something new from them. And I think that, that you mentioning modernism really makes me think about the language in this book, and how I think it is in a lot of ways like evocative of some of the prose we read, like way back. We read Nightwood early last year, not necessarily to like the same degree of like Baroque complexity that sometimes like paragraphs in that book could get to.
Yeah.
But Delany really just almost has like a poetic ear for language in this book, the way he describes things. There's a musical instrument in this book that takes there's a big, plays a very prominent role in the lives of these characters, and one character in particular, this thing called a sensory syrinx. And you can't really imagine what it looks like. It's almost like this thing like the Shield of Achilles, where it's like too complicated to actually wrap your head around what it would look like. But the way Delany describes it, you can still understand like what it does and like how it functions, even if you can't actually picture what it looks like.
Yeah, it's got all of these like impossible dials and things for your hands and like pads, and like every time somebody's trying to play it who doesn't know what they're doing, I feel like Delany adds another feature of it that he hasn't described before. So the person is like, well, what do I do with this? And then like the guy who knows how to play it is like, oh, you just do that. But it's like sort of like impossible like description. But yeah, as you were saying, John, it's clear what it does.
Yeah. Or just the way he describes a lot of technology in this book, where he describes like this character we referred to earlier, the Harvard educated guy. His name is Catton, and he has basically what's a fancy tape recorder.
Yeah.
And Delany always refers to it as like a jeweled box.
Which that he's speaking into. Yeah.
This incredibly like evocative way of referring to what is theoretically like a very mundane or even like retro technology for the time period the book takes place in. But it really kind of both renders the world strange and beautiful, but you never get totally lost either.
Right.
It feels a bit like Gene Wolfe in that way, who's another kind of new wave guy, where he wants you to understand what's going on, but he wants to describe things in a way that does make them less familiar, makes you think about the strangeness or the beauty of a piece of technology or a cultural object.
Estranging effect.
Yeah. But again, never leaving you. It doesn't feel like it's trying to trick you the way that sometimes Gene Wolfe feels like he's trying to trick you.
Right.
It's Delaney's not being clever most of the time. It's really this more poetic angle.
Yeah. Gene Wolfe, unlike Delany, he tricked us into buying Pringles because Gene Wolfe was also the man who invented the machine that made Pringles, and Delany is not quite that much of a trickster. But
not an engineer.
Yeah, not an engineer.
Okay, we got the obligatory reference to Gene Wolfe inventing the Pringles machine that any podcast that brings up Gene Wolfe must do. Why don't we talk a bit actually about Nova? I feel like we've been dancing around it.
Yeah, let's jump in. So yeah, what is Nova about?
We got 10 pounds of podcast to fit into this 5-pound podcast bag.
So one way to approach talking about Nova, I think, is that it is, as I alluded to earlier, possibly it's sort of like a Grail Quest book, in that there is a captain who is gathering together a ragtag bunch of people for his crew in order to sail into the nova of a sun in order to acquire a rare mysterious substance known as Illyrion. And he gathers together this ragtag group of people. We meet all the people. The novel spends a little more time with the interiority of really just three: Mouse, the aforementioned Caton, and then the captain known as Lork von Ray.
Yes. So, like you said, kind of a Grail Quest. I thought very evocative of Moby Dick.
Yes, as did I. Yeah.
Well as perhaps most crucially, actually, Treasure Island.
Yeah.
We start the book in what is essentially like a seedy dockside tavern, where we're following this character Mouse, who is a Romani gentleman. I'm not going to use the word Delany uses.
Right.
It begins with a G, but not going there. So we're going to say Romani gentleman, who he's the one who plays this kind of impossible future instrument, the sensory syrinx, which is kind of this. It's a musical instrument that can also produce like illusions, more
and like
or less.
Images. Yeah.
Like holograms. And apparently is so powerful that it can blind or deafen people if it's used improperly. So it's also kind of a weapon in a way too.
Well, and there's some great, I think Delany, you had mentioned the description. He has some great fun with people asking him to play images that also dance, because it is also a music instrument. And like somebody asked to like create the Hagia Sophia, but to have it have like a dancing beat is like some of the things that they ask Mouse to play on this syrinx.
Yes. But he comes across this essentially like mad old sea dog.
Yeah.
And again, a scene that feels so evocative of like Treasure Island. I'm trying to think of the character from Treasure Island who's
it's also like in Moby Dick, because they see that guy who's named after Elijah the Prophet, who's also blind, I think, and he goes, "Don't go on that boat with Moby Dick." Like he literally tells them in that. And so it's kind of like that too.
Yeah, so it's sort of this moment where we have this like transitional figure, this character who is both serves as like a warning to this character who is more or less our protagonist, at least at this point in the book, but is also kind of offers this call to adventure.
Yeah.
Because he basically tells Mouse that he has been blinded His name is Dan, which is very funny, very, very classic way of just sticking a normal guy name into science fiction.
Yeah, my Sea Dog, Mad Sea Dog character named Dan, not Lork von Ray.
But he has been blinded by essentially looking into a supernova. And the experience of this has completely burned out his eyes as well as driven him irrevocably mad. But the possibility of such a thing existing out in the universe and being able to be seen is kind of impossible for young Mouse to resist.
Yeah.
So we get a little background on him. We kind of find out about how he grew up on Earth. He's kind of a fish out of water. We find out being Romani, the Romani have kind of maintained a certain level of cultural insularity, whereas the rest of the Earth has more or less become united. And join kind of this federation of planets centered around the Draco constellation. That's kind of one of the main factions in this universe. But we kind of gradually learn a bit about this world. One thing we learn is that one thing I did find kind of funny is he says when he's a youth, he is puttering around like France and Italy.
Right.
But then later in the book, apparently Great Britain and the United States no longer exist and are basically only spoken of in shadows and legends.
One wonders what happened there. So
only good things. Imagine a world without America and the UK, and play the clip from The Simpsons where they imagine the world without lawyers.
Yeah, everyone's holding hands and partaking in every possible culture at once. Because they said everyone is united. Also, because we can get into it more in detail later, but there was the invention of these sockets that everybody has by which they can interface directly with a computer. Yes. And that leads to this kind of banding together, as well as the less differences between cultures and this sort of melting pot effect.
Yes. So basically everyone is a cyborg in this world. The Romani being a exception. Yeah. Mouse, after he leaves his community, does get these implants, which are described as kind of being, these sockets in your wrists and feet that your wrists and then your spine, one at the top of your spine and one at the base of your spine.
Yeah.
That you use to interface with, they say all kinds of technology, like everything from vacuum cleaners to spaceships. And it's a little vague how exactly it works, but more or less you are consciously in control of whatever it is you're interfacing with, in a way that there's no divide between your physical body and the machine.
Yes.
So, you think you want to move the vacuum cleaner, and rather than holding a joystick and moving it around that way, you are controlling it the same way you control your hand or another part of your body.
And we're told that this leads to no more alienation from labor. A meme that just says, "I am no longer alienated from my labor."
I want to come back to that.
Yeah, let's come back to that. Yeah,
I feel like that's a big conversation, and I feel like we haven't quite fleshed the world out enough to get to that. But
right. So it
is very interesting, and it does, I think, point to the fact that Delany is also clearly a very politically astute thinker. This is not just a whiz bang novel, and it's not just kind of doing mysticism. He clearly has a fairly nuanced understanding, I think, of political economy.
Yeah.
In a way that I was impressed by. So more or less, we end up Mouse ends up running into kind of this dashing space captain,
Right.
At this port, and ends up more or less getting signed on for this mission. So Lork von Ray.
Yeah, he's putting together a crew. Yeah.
Which again, man, what a name.
Yeah.
Like I cannot fit. You give me 100 years to like sit and try to think of a better space pirate captain name. And I do not think I could do better than Lork von Ray.
Yeah, because the Von has the sort of nobility and the aristocraticness, but Ray, because he's a space captain, and then Lork, it's like the perfect amount of like strangeness.
Yeah, well, and Lork is an interesting character, I think, probably especially for the time this book is written, in that he's biracial.
Yeah.
It is kind of interesting the way that the things Delany does posit like still exist or are still like acknowledged in kind of this future world. So Lork is half Norwegian from his father's side, and then half Senegalese on his mother's side. But they also are from a different part of the galaxy, the Pleiades Federation,
right,
which is kind of a separate political entity to this Draco constellation we were talking about earlier. But they still have this connection, this identification with like their Earth like ethnicity,
right?
In this way that is almost a little strange to me. That's something that again I was reminded of Bester here, is that kind of in his work, at least in The Stars by Destination, there is kind of this weird tension between this idea of like humanity is a spacefaring civilization, but people still care about if you're French.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I like that you pointed that out too, because people are in the novel are lamenting the lack of cultural solidity because there's all of this interchange and exchange and everybody can plug into computers, but people still take time to, like, for instance, his mom cooks authentic Senegalese food, and, people still draw distinctions based on what language is being spoken. For instance, the Pleiades dialect is almost like everyone talks kind of like Yoda, where like the sentence structure is like reversed.
Their verbs are always at the end of their sentence.
Yeah. And so there's still differences, but at the same time, it's like everyone is in this sort of like, exchange, cultural mixing pot type society, even if it is intergalactic.
Yeah, when we get more into kind of the portrayal of technology in this book, I do think there's some interesting stuff here. This book, I hesitate to say it, but there is like a degree to which it feels almost a little prescient.
Yeah, yeah.
In this way that feels very indirect. I don't think Delany saw the internet coming, but there is kind of this way where it does feel like the stuff he's talking about very much applies to kind of where we find ourselves in the modern day. But we'll get to that. To that. I feel like we still have a little more. There's a like we said, folks, there's a lot in this book, so be patient with us, please. So anyway, at that point, we do get Lork von Ray's kind of backstory.
Right.
The structure of this book is really weird because we basically have a chapter on Mouse and then like 3 chapters with his backstory, a chapter where he meets Lork von Ray, and then like 3 chapters of Lork von Ray's backstory. And then the plot actually starts, but we're about halfway through the book at that point.
Yeah. And Caton, for instance, really doesn't get any backstory, although the novel does kind of go into his head at one point. We
do get some backstory on him. His backstory, we don't get like full chapters on him the way we do for Lork and Mouse, but we do get background on him. Caton grew up on the moon, so he's kind of got this. He's got kind of a weird physique from growing up in like a low gravity environment. He has like really long limbs and like big hands.
Yeah.
And he went to Harvard and got like a liberal arts education, which man, I really hope there's still liberal arts education in the 31st century.
Yeah, we should note that Caton, as we mentioned in the opening, because of his liberal arts education, he's always explaining things to people, because in the 31st century, everyone is just so hyper specialized that there's no conception of general education.
Well, and also crucially, Caton, I don't actually know how the pronunciation should go. But he is a novelist.
Yes.
Or an aspiring novelist. He is one of the few like devotees that the novel has left as an art form.
Yeah, because it's archaic.
It's most people don't even know what a novel is. It's not even like today where most people don't read, but at least they know what a novel is. The novel has been apparently wholly superseded by a form of entertainment known as the psychorama, which unfortunately we don't learn much about.
Yeah, we can only guess what it is. I imagine it's just like a like one of those things you plug into, and then it's like a movie, but it engages your whole brain.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's like yeah, like full body VR.
Yeah,
kind of thing. Which yeah, I don't know how the novel competes with that.
But one of the best lines in the book is Mouse saying, "If you write a novel, Caden, I don't think I could read it, but you could read it to me." Which is like one, perfect, and two, like it show they have those two characters have a strong bond, even if they're like kind of like opposites. Well, we should also mention too the rest of the crew, which isn't really, they don't go super into detail, but there's two characters named Ty, and the other one is
Sebastian.
And Sebastian has these weird pets. Ty can do tarot card readings, which comes up significant later. And then there's two brothers who are twins, I believe, but one is black, the other one is albino, and then they have a missing third brother who we find out about later.
Yes. And they are kind of druggies and mischief makers, as well as they also kind of serve as our main inroad to like the last of the three main factions of this book, which are the Outer Colonies, which are the most recently founded kind of confederation in this universe that is mostly composed of kind of these somewhat backwards mining colonies, whereas Draco is kind of the old Earth and like old money faction, more or less. And then the Pleiadian Federation, they say that it's like founded by like the middle class, basically. So it's kind of the bourgeois republic of kind of self-made people. And that gets to be very important, kind of Lork von Ray's personal arc, which is very motivated by kind of this classic Count of Monte Cristo-esque revenge story between himself and this set of twins from Earth, who had this interplanetary mining corporation called Redshift that have something of a monopoly on this Illyrian material.
Yeah, the Prince and Ruby Red are those two characters.
Yes, and Von Ray's decision to go on this journey to find a supernova and to extract Illyrian from it is both motivated by his politics, the fact that Draco is kind of poised to overtake the Pleiadian Federation by their control of this fuel, which essentially runs everything in interstellar travel and kind of domestic life in this setting.
Yeah.
By basically finding like a huge deposit of this stuff that is so big that it will basically crash the market on Illyrian and completely knock the Draco Federation as well as the Red family's economic feet out from under them.
Yeah. Like an undoing of the established order. I also just wanted to read a brief quote about Illyrian. Caden is explaining Illyrian to Mouse because Mouse doesn't really know. And as we've said, Caden's the over-explainer, and he says, these are the particles that carry the binding energies holding together these supernuclei as ordinary mesons hold together the nucleus in more familiar elements. This group of super heavy, super stable elements go under the general heading of Illyrian. And to quote again the eminent Pleveninsky, basically, gentlemen, Illyrian is something else. So, and later he says, as you were saying, John, it's ubiquity in the galaxy. Illyrian is all things to all men, I think is what Caden says at one point.
Well, it's a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
You know, in the best way possible. It's the suitcase from Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, it glows anytime the Lorcron Ray is thinking about it. He's like spotlit on his face. So yeah,
it is within the context of this book, like you said, Ben, this is a Grail quest. It's the Holy Grail. It's the impossible thing. It's the white whale. It's the thing that we are on the hunt for reasons that kind of go beyond what would be normally motivating, like
pure functionality, something like that.
I mean, well, Von Ray, like I just said, he has like personal and political motivations for doing this, but there's also like a deeper calling to him. He's a daredevil. He, in his youth, he's like this dashing, like racing spaceship pilot, and then he has this terrible experience like with this like hoity-toity family, and these like sociopathic twins, one of whom he's clearly like in love with, but she's in love with her brother, and again kind of this classic dastardly twin archetype kind of thing.
The evil twins who wronged me. So
and again, like Prince, the male twin, he's deformed, kind of like Richard III. He's missing an arm, and he has this robot arm that is like 10 times stronger than a regular human arm. It's like a pirate hook, basically.
At one point he crushes sand back into glass. And he turns sand into glass. Like that's how powerful his hand is. So Lork has this motivation for doing it, but there's also this deeper thing. You kind of almost get the impression that even if he didn't have all these, like his quest for the Illyrion is overdetermined. Like even if all this stuff didn't happen, even if he didn't have this political and personal motivation, like he would just need to do this because it is his quest. And the fact that all these things did happen, it's because it's his destiny and he needs to do it. Which gets us into, I think, one of the big themes in this book, which is fate and mysticism. I think we've kind of gotten far enough in the plot that we can really discuss this. So once we kind of have everybody together and they're all on the ship, they're looking for, so part of the problem that they're having is that there is no way to like find a star that's going to go supernova, just kind of as a like spaceship crew. They don't have like the equipment to do that. I have no idea if that's realistic at all, but it's not important. And so they are kind of on the hunt for like, how do we find a star that's going to go supernova so that we can do this? Because the timing is very important. They're going to fly into it as it's like about to blow up. And then they're going to just pick up all the Illyrion that's supposedly like in the middle of it as it's about to go nova.
Because basically, as Von Ray puts it, like the nova is like where reality is malleable. And so, they're kind of entering this unreal space where they can do the impossible. But to do that, they have to find a star that's on the verge of doing this so that they can be in there like as it happens. And so without a way of determining this on their own, they do what any good hippies do, and they consult a deck of tarot cards.
Right. Which we're told still exist, even though it's the 31st century. And it has to do with...
Not only that, Ben, we're told that basically the tarot cards we have right now are not the real tarot cards. That there is a like truer version of the tarot that has been rediscovered over the course of the intervening centuries. And now that these have been kind of rediscovered or recovered, either from like the human like collective unconscious, or
I think isn't it like everybody coming together as a result of the cultural like melting pot that like the true tarot card has emerged, I think.
I mean, that might be, I don't know if it's ever again put that exactly. I don't know that Delany wants us to like I don't think he wants to spell it out for us that clearly, but I think that there is that's definitely part of the equation here. But more or less, the tarot is accepted as maybe not a science exactly, but more or less completely real.
Yes, yeah.
And so they do this tarot card reading, and crucially, Mouse takes the Sun card. It like drops out of this deck before they start doing the reading.
Yeah, and he like swipes it because he's got light fingers.
Yes, and you know the card. You know these cards are described as being really cool. They're like 3D cards.
One of the archetypes of the true one is the hermaphrodite.
The divine hermaphrodite and the cosmos are like two of the like new cards.
Yeah.
But the sun, which is this card that symbolizes abundance and victory and triumph of light over darkness, Mouse takes it before the reading is done, and so it's not in the deck. And so the reading that they get basically sets them up for failure, like from the get-go.
Yes,
because the card that symbolizes victory is not in the deck.
And Mouse takes it too, because like he doesn't want fate to be spelled out in the cards. He's like, I think he's had to like live by his wits. He doesn't want to submit to this being what happens. And so, yeah, as you said, John, he inadvertently sort of dooms them as a result of swiping this card because he doesn't want something bad to happen.
Well, it's also something that seems to be a Romani cultural trait at this point.
Yeah.
The Romani apparently have while the rest of society has embraced the tarot as a more or less like scientific thing, the Romani have abandoned it.
Yeah.
Catton makes a kind of snide remark about the fact that like the Romani at one point were masters of this technology, and now that everyone else has accepted it's real, they've rejected it. So the Mouse, you know, he like you said, he's had to live by his wits. He doesn't want to accept that he, you know, I feel like the idea is that the Mouse he's our protagonist because he is this like small piece of the universe. Like he's the mouse. And we'll kind of get to it a little later. Him and Catton have a very interesting conversation towards the end of the book about kind of his role in the story and what he maybe represents. But, you know, he is resisting the smallness of the individual person in kind of the wider universe. He does not want to believe in fate.
Yeah.
He wants to believe he has some kind of agency. And so he commits this act, which ends up dooming this expedition.
Right. Yeah.
But again, it's one of those things where it's overdetermined. Like, even if the card had been in the deck, there's no like if the tarot's real, then they couldn't have drawn it anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But it's this thing of even Mouse having the opportunity. You know, there's a point where somebody asks him, like, if it had been a different card, would you have picked it up? And he says, like, I mean, I guess so, but it was this card.
Yeah, but it was the sun. Yeah, yeah. And like, I think part of the reading is that like the Mouse is going to stand in between the captain and his objective, which like in stealing the sun card ends up like being true in some way, as well as what actually happens in the plot. I also want to add that the scene where they're doing the tarot card reading is incredibly dramatic. And it's one of the more dramatic tarot cards readings I can see depicted in fiction, where like Caton is trying to do the reading as Ty is doing the reading, and Caton is getting it wrong because he's not the one dealing the cards. So like at one point, like he's like, oh, this card is upside down, that's bad. And Ty's like, I'm the one doing the reading, so it's right side up to me. like, and so like there's sort of this like great like war of interpretation. I mean, not war, but like push and pull of interpretation. It's dramatic. The Mouse is freaking out because he doesn't want to submit to fate. Like all of these character interests, including the captain who wants his tarot card done, all of these like interests are competing in this scene. And like I haven't read that many tarot card depictions, but even the tarot card reading in Gravity's Rainbow is like done by the narrator, and it's just like, oh, by the way, this is a character's tarot card reading. It's not like this tense and dramatic, and I think that's pretty unique.
Well, and I think it's also kind of funny because then later in the book, at least in two other scenes, they're just like playing cards with the tarot cards.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of like tricks you at first because the way like Delany kind of there's some interesting like chapter transitions in this book where like he'll stop in the middle of a phrase, and then in the next chapter, like it'll either pick the phrase back up or there'll be something that kind of plays into that last line. And so he kind of tricks you into thinking that there's another tarot card reading going on.
Right.
And then you find out that they're just like basically playing pinochle.
This strikes me. There were tarot cards in Moonglow. Now that I think about it, I wasn't thinking about it while I was reading, but his grandma gives him the tarot cards. Like she was using them, and he like gets a hold of them through her.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the tarot, again, maybe this is a good point to talk about kind of the way tarot is employed, or the way that tarot kind of the role it plays in the book, which is, yeah, this idea of symbols and the way that people use symbols to understand the world.
Yeah.
And particularly in art, there's a reason why tarot cards recur in art, and it's because they are this incredibly evocative, set of titles and imagery and all these things that you can place into a story.
Yeah.
To serve as a shorthand or to illustrate a point in this way that can people can pick up on what you're trying to say in an elegant way. And that's without even getting into the fact that these symbols, outside of kind of the functionality within a story, they really do carry an immense amount of like psychological and symbolic weight to people.
Yeah.
One thing I do appreciate, though, is that Delany clearly does actually understand how tarot cards work.
Yeah.
I'm a pedant about this, obviously, but the way you can always tell when people don't know how tarot cards work is they'll almost always have the death card come up in a reading and have it be like, oh, this is really bad.
Yeah.
And the death card actually isn't bad. It's a card that represents like transitions and change. Yeah. Whereas the bad card is the Tower.
Yeah.
Which is drawn in this story. So Delany clearly, I guess like an old gay hippie that he is, he knows how tarot cards work, and I appreciated that. But
well, and there's also just something interesting too, like in this cultural pot world of technology and mixing, like these imagery, like the archetypes, as you were describing, John, have like so much power that like characters can't but help consult them, use them to make sense of their lives. And I think like if you wanted to place this within the 60s, like at one point, Caton says we're at a moment of history now, Mouse. And I feel like you could kind of read that a little bit into the circumstances of which this book was written, because it did come out in 1968. There's references to the Kennedy assassination. So there's an interesting like double remove or like double effect here where like this was a big thing in the 60s as well as the characters in this story. And I think it's like they still have like a lot of power, and they, like you were saying, they still appear and are useful to people as a way of making sense of stuff and like telling stories.
Well, I think that the 60s were a time where it did feel like, it wasn't kind of the height of globalization, but it was the point where globalization felt like it was happening, at least on a cultural level.
Yeah.
And you had all these ideas from other countries kind of entering more or less mainstream culture in America. And it felt like there was, I think that to a certain type of person, it did feel like a monoculture was something that was going to grow out of, this peace and prosperity that America was theoretically like bringing to the world.
Right.
Or just that, a greater level of connection was going to bring to the world. There's a ton of books from the 60s, kind of metaphysical handbooks about, blending the wisdom of the Orient with like Western science.
Right. Yeah.
And we're going to, really figure out reality by taking these different traditions and blending them together. And I think that Delany's writing at a time where that, that's an idea that now we kind of find spurious at best, or
naive,
racist and naive at worst. But Delany, I think, is writing at a time where there's more optimism about what this globalization of culture is going to mean.
Yeah.
Or what it could mean, and maybe still can mean.
It's not foreclosed. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I think that in that context, I find this idea of like this mysticism he's talking about, this idea that like, if we can just get past like the cultural specifics enough, we can find the real shit.
Yeah.
It's very like Jungian in a way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So,
but it's like an immensely appealing idea too. Like the idea that there is magic in the world, it's just hidden by all the bullshit we put on top of it.
right.
You know, and if we can just learn to see past that veil, you know, we can see the nova.
Yeah.
But again, that's complicated too, because that doesn't go well for people in this book.
Yeah, yeah. As a result of the tarot card reading, it doesn't go well.
Well, I think that another thing, kind of on this piece, you know, archetypes are very important in the story. I think we've referenced, you know, kind of the sea hand at the beginning. Mouse is very much an archetype that, again, isn't as common anymore, at least in kind of this ethnicized version of like the Romani person, but, you know, is still very much a character type in terms of like this vagabond youth who's trying to find his way in the world. You know, Lork, I think it's really important. Lork, like one of the turning points in his life is his parents revealing to him that the Von Ray family, when they came out to the Pleiades system, they were pirates.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and part of the conflict between him and the Red family is that his family is new money, their family is old money. He like tries to be like basically a preppy asshole by being like, basically a yacht racer.
yeah, like a Playboy yacht racer.
Yeah, but then, you know, when these people won't accept him and his parents are like, oh, you come from a line of pirates, he's like, okay, I'm going to be a pirate.
Well, and like those pirates like have screwed over Prince and Ruby Red's family as well. So it's like this sort of like this realization that your idyllic childhood was founded on violence and extortion and like plunder. And I think like that like revelation is twinned with when he like looks up into the sun, or like a star, and he doesn't see a star anymore, he sees fuel for empire. It's like literally what he says, because he says, I have to quote because it's a really awesome quote. He says, hold on, Dan, have you, Lork mused, ever realized that every sun as we travel between them is a furnace where the very worlds of empire are smelted? Every element among the hundreds is fused from their central nuclear matter. And so like the very star becomes, fuel to be plundered as a pirate, to be used to support my family. And like, I found that revelation to be kind of like heartbreaking, as well as like very important in that, like, you know, it's like, even the world has turned to something else as a result of me realizing that my family were pirates. Although I think, as you were saying, John, he sort of realizes that and it's empowering, but I found it kind of like troubling, I guess. So,
well, it is a turn in his life. Like it's childhood's end. Like it's the point where he kind of ironically like stops seeing the world as like a playground, and like you said, starts to see it as like a place where he can carve a name out for, like, the universe becomes his white whale. You know, and he is going to, you know, in this like kind of almost like anarchistic way, like he is determined to prove a villain.
Right.
You know, he is going to, you know, if he can't be accepted into this like old money society, and you know, get the girl that he wants, blah blah blah, you know, he is going to make it everyone's problem. He is going to destroy the galactic economy single-handedly.
Which, that's also very Ahab too. Like when they're like, hey, like, let's go back, let's not get the whale. And then Ahab is like, I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. Like, we're going to kill the whale. So,
Delany is playing very consciously with like fictional archetypes here, not just in the tarot cards, but in the characters as well. You know, some of them are, again, more subtle than others. Some of them are more shallow than others, like the twins.
Yeah, I like that the twins are like traveling hippie vagabonds. They're like, yeah, we had to get a job because we had no more bliss. You know, the drugs ran out. But yeah, they're not entirely like fleshed out, and they finish each other's sentences. Yeah,
but they still occupy like this trickster archetype in a way.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, the fact that the twins are filling in this very like classic archetype of like, something like the Lannisters, where it's like, oh, we have these incestuous twins who are obsessed with each other.
Yeah.
To the point of literal incest. And, it becomes this driving obsession for another character. He's in love with one of them. He hates the other one.
Yeah, he's in love with Ruby Red, and Prince. Prince, like we haven't mentioned, like disfigures him at that scene where he's rejected.
Yeah, that's another part of this revenge plot. But these characters are all kind of filling in for an archetype, but they don't feel shallow either.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because Delany does take that time to give us their backstories. Like we have like these lengthy flashbacks where we kind of get like mini Bildungsromans of these characters. The knock on science fiction a lot of times is that, the characters are just cardboard cutouts so that the engineer who wrote this can talk about like the theoretical engine system he made up for his spaceship. And that's true a lot of the time. But these characters, while being archetypical, also feel like very well sketched.
Yes.
In this way that I was very impressed by. And I think the language is a big part of that. I think the fact that Delany is clearly being so deliberate in his language, each word feels like he took the time to select it. It doesn't feel like there's flippancy here. And that means like he's able to get a lot more mileage out of a single paragraph than maybe a less talented author would. He can evoke so many more feelings with his imagery, with his choices of words, with his dialogue, than a lot of people can.
He can shift too between the like consciousness of who's talking very easily, and like they're all very broadly defined, and like, Caton is expository. The mouse is usually like, it's really close to his brain when something is happening. It goes into Lork Von's Ray for the Bildungsroman. Like it can telescope between them in a way that's very like, I don't know. It feels very effortless, and each one is like different. So you kind of know who's talking, and like the characters are always finishing each other's sentences. Or like, for instance, Sebastian is always accompanied by his like bat creatures like flying around him whenever he's doing something. Like everything. Yeah.
Monkey thing.
It's like, yeah, monkey, parrot, bat thing. Like everything is like very distinctive, and you never, to me, it's never like unclear who's talking.
Yeah. No, everyone has a distinct voice. Which I also like the way he uses language, like the fact that the Pleiadians have this kind of Yoda accent or dialect, really just kind of gives them like a very distinct character.
Yeah.
And you always know when a Pleiadian character is talking, but at the same time, like it's this small choice, but it feels like, and he doesn't like take a ton of time to be like, oh, they put their verbs at the end of their sentences because like they have this philosophical outlook as a society or anything like that.
Right.
But it's this small tweak that bespeaks to the fact like this is a different culture. Like these are a different type of people. They're going to view the world, have different values than people in another society in this way that sometimes, particularly in kind of fantasy fiction where characters are theoretically from different cultures, but because of like the needs of telling a story, like all speak the same language, It can actually be really hard to illustrate like those differences effectively.
Yeah, instead of, what is it, like they all speak the common tongue or something like that. Yeah.
And it's again, it even does some lifting in terms of the character work because Von Ray is Pleiadian, but he consciously speaks in like the Draco dialect.
Right.
Because he's spent his whole life as kind of this upper class comprador up to a certain point.
There's a great moment in that flashback scene where he's going to, like, when he's still a party boy, and he like hires a crew so he can fly to Paris for the party, I believe. And like one of the guys he hires is like a lower class guy. And like at one point, like the lower class guy goes, you know, we see the world very differently, you and I. Like, and it's like this realization that like class, you know, determines your outlook and your possibility and what is important. I also found that like the party scene was like the most 60s, where like one character just goes, "We're going to Paris, baby." Like you just imagine like somebody saying that in the 60s, and like they're all wearing like outfits and doing drugs, and it's like very like psychedelic, like swinging 60s kind of.
Yeah, I was literally imagining everyone kind of dressed as like Austin Powers characters a little bit.
Yeah, baby. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I was imagining Lork with like a shirt with like a collar with like the points like almost touching his nipples, and like a tie with like that's like huge, but like the knot is like tiny.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got some like horrible pattern that's never been seen before. Yeah, so
groovy, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, Paris, baby. Yeah, like it's like, yeah. And like it's very like, you know, to the nines in terms of like description and sensory details and that kind of stuff.
Well, and it's cool, you know, again, like you said, Delany makes a big point of like the way that art is bound in time. And it's kind of fascinating that, again, this book evokes the 60s so much more effectively than like if you or I tried to write a novel that was set, quote unquote, in the 60s, like right now.
Right. Yeah.
Because we were there.
Well, and it would be, you know, it would be the Tlan Ukbor Orbis Terratus version of the 60s. Like it would be the version of the 60s that we've all agreed is the way that you tell a story about the 60s, you know.
Well, so, and it would also really be about 2025.
Yeah. Well, and I like that Caton says that, because one thing we haven't mentioned is that Caton, like, he's trying to write a novel, but all he can really do is do notes toward a novel, which felt very like I don't know, you know, like Robert Musil, like I have to keep telling this ongoing story because I'm trying to encounter something. But like he's looking for his subject. And like, you know, when he talks about the thing about the time, he's like, one of the reasons he can't pick the right subject is he's trying to pick a subject that's indicative of the time that he lives in. And so like there's this pressure for Caton to like get psychological complexity, get, you know, the aspects of taking a novel, but while also like having to work with the constraints of the novel as an artistic form. And I feel like it's interesting that Delany puts this in here almost as like a reflection on what he's doing, because there's multiple times that like Caton says something that the book does, or like with the ending as well. It's like the two are commenting on each other.
Yeah, well, you know, I found myself thinking the same thing. It's interesting, you know, again, Delany is writing this novel at a time, you know, again, I didn't go into this book expecting to be like, oh, this book is prescient, but again, it feels like it kind of is.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about it on the show before. People have been talking about it for I don't know how long. The novel is dead.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
I'm not making that declaration. I'm just saying what people have told me.
Word on the street.
But
yeah.
I think that if the novel is dead, it's been dead longer than we realized. And I think Delany is grappling with what that means in the context of where he is, you know, almost 60 years, you know, prior to now.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I'm thinking about, I'm associating back to like what we talked about in the Rise of the Novel episode a couple months ago. You know, the novel is this art form that develops when, you know, kind of with the nation, you know, with kind of this defined sphere where you can understand the society you live in, you know, and maybe you don't understand everything, but you can learn enough where you can kind of start to fill in the details, and you can write about the barrel maker, and you can, even if you're not a barrel maker, you have enough in common with the barrel maker, and you know the barrel maker is accessible enough to you as an individual that you can learn about him and you can write about his life, you know, in this way that can be illustrative, and that kind of builds on itself so that the novel becomes this way for different segments of society to learn about each other, and kind of see into each other's corners of the world.
Right.
and I think that is something that, to be perfect, I don't think the novel is actually dead. I think the novel is evolving. But that is like a question that we're still, I think, grappling with in 2025, but I think they were just starting to become aware of in the 1960s. Like, what does the novel look like in a global world?
Right.
And I think that's why, particularly in the 60s, there is this explosion in genre fiction. It's a way of dealing with how large and like complicated the modern world is. You can create a little world where you can understand everything and you can set your story within that.
Right. Yeah.
Whether you do that by creating a fictional, like fantastical world, like the galaxy in this one, or Westeros and Song of Ice and Fire, or Tatooine and
Lord of the Rings.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to say Lord of the Rings because that's prior to this point, but you get what I'm saying. Or you do it by, you pick like a very particular individual or like segment of society to comment on.
Right. Yeah.
The way that, maybe like autofiction does today. You have to at some point like draw a magic circle around what you're working
boundary.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no individual can like actually understand global society. It's impossible. We're all like plugged into the psychorama of the internet now, and like constantly being bombarded with like the full scope of humanity, like at all times. And it's driving everyone insane, and we're all like miserable because of it.
Yeah.
But I think Delany's dealing with that in microcosm at this point in history, because all of a sudden, again, you have photographs coming from Vietnam, like showing what's going on with the war. You have the Kennedy assassination. You have,
which we should talk about, because Caton talks about the Kennedy assassination, but it's like this world's version of it.
Yes.
Because just briefly, like, he's like, maybe I should write my book about that. And he talks about how, like, in this world, the president was assassinated and everybody was watching on Psychorama, which meant that everybody felt everything that whatever the character is who is Jackie Onassis felt when Kennedy's head got exploded in the car. And so he's like, that was such a trauma that everyone was affected by it. And he's like, maybe I should write about that. And like, he does it. And I was like, it was like at that point, Caden became Don DeLillo, but like, but like the idea that like that, like that could be the subject of the time, but he ends up discarding that in favor of other things. And I think like that's, like you were saying, John, exactly where I need to focus on this thing that because of communications technology, we're all like immediately aware of. And I think Delany is saying that like, novels used to be communication technology, like with the barrel maker, but I don't think like we have other communication technologies that have like superseded it. And so the novel needs to become something else. Yeah.
And I think that's why, again, he falls back into like the archetypes of genre fiction, because he can communicate something deeper, something more fundamental to the human experience than kind of the specificity of like that early novel. The even while he's talking about the future, he's really evoking these like mythic archetypes of the pirate, or the vagabond, the fool, the divine hermaphrodite.
I feel like Caden would be the scribe, or like the scholar, I guess, if we wanted to say like that.
I think he's the hermit.
Oh yeah, that's because the moons. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. That would be my guess, at least.
That makes more sense, because he talks about like the moons are good because you can be alone. He says that at one point because he's obsessed with the moon.
Yeah. Which actually we're kind of breaking the rules here, because at one point they're very upfront, like that the major arcana cannot stand in for a person.
Well, yeah, because they say that, and that's true to the tarot rules, I'm assuming.
I mean, I've never heard that as a rule, but I mean, I don't have the real tarot, Ben.
We haven't gotten that yet. Yeah, so I don't know. Like it was this. I think you're right about communication technologies, and I think Delany, like you were saying with Vietnam, and seeing like that guy get shot on TV in Vietnam, like that's the things Delany is dealing with in writing this.
Yeah, it's kind of the beginning of the stochastic like breakdown that we've been experiencing for the last however many decades. Everybody went crazy when they had to watch the president's head get blown up on TV, and now no one like wants to believe anything that's actually happening is happening.
Yeah, yeah. Which also, just as a brief digression in Dahlgren, I think in Dahlgren he tried to write something more encompassing, but since it's Delany and Dahlgren, it's like it's in this strange, bizarro world universe. And in that one, like the main character known as the Kid, he's kind of like a vagabond, and he circulates from different groups in society. But the society is like post-apocalyptic, and like there is like weird sex, there's like gangs, there's like just all this weird stuff happening in this post-apocalyptic city. But I think that's Delany attempting to do something on like a huge scale, where if it's not quite society, it's like society as represented in this like environment he's created. Dahlgren is extremely fascinating and also just batshit weird in places. So, but anyway, I think like that's like a scaling up from what he's attempting to do here. So
yeah, I mean that's a more mature Delany. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think that's also like coming out in maybe the 80s.
Or late 70s, so one of the two. Yeah,
very very different world than when this book is written. I do think this maybe can be our pivot to talking about kind of the portrayal of technology and work in this book.
Yeah.
I think that we've grounded a lot of the like social stuff in this book, but I think that the sockets, the interfacing with technology, the nature of work in this universe, like Delany gives just as much page room to talking about what labor is like in this universe,
right,
as he does to talking about like how tarot cards work.
Yeah.
And so like that's not incidental in a way that I think a worse book could make this be incidental and just have it be like a future-y thing, like yeah, everyone has like a plug in their skull that they use to plug into the spaceship.
hand wavy, yeah.
And it doesn't mean anything else in the context of like the broader symbolism. But yeah, Delany takes a lot of time to explain like why this is a thing, what role it plays in this world. And like even like how it came about, like historically.
Right. Ashton Clark. Yeah.
Which starts with Ashton Clark, which is I was trying to figure out. Do you know who Clark Ashton Smith is?
I've heard the name, but I don't know who it is.
Okay, he was kind of he was a very prominent weird fiction writer, kind of a contemporary of Lovecraft. I'd say that he like kind of. If you have to like compare him to other people, he's kind of like, what if you actually like took H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard and you blended them into one pot together?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So very, very cool writer. He also did a lot of good poetry. So he's like a classic 1930s, like weird fiction, sword and sorcery, cosmic horror style writer.
Okay.
And Delany is definitely not being like, I don't believe this is like a Freudian slip on his part.
Right, it's very purposeful.
I feel like he's very deliberate. Like, I can't believe an editor would have seen him do that as a name and not been like, was that on purpose? And like pointed out to him if it was a Freudian slip. So I have to believe this is deliberate. But I couldn't figure out like what it's supposed to evoke, because Clark Ashton Smith does not like, he doesn't have like stories about cyborgs,
right?
Really. So I wasn't sure what was going on there, but maybe we'll discover something as we talk through this. But
yeah, other than like a kind of evocation, like folk wisdom. Yeah, it's like I don't because like they say his name every time you get a new job.
Like when I originally thought maybe it was Clark Ashton Smith, the writer that was being named there.
Oh, wow.
And like
Okay.
he had like taken on like a religious like role in this universe for some reason.
That'd be great.
But we find out that he Ashton Clark, correct?
Yes.
Okay, Ashton Clark. I've said Clark Ashton Smith so many times that I'm like losing track here in my brain.
No, yeah, Ashton Clark made the sockets, but then
no, he did not make the sockets.
Oh,
he was
okay.
the philosopher who in the 23rd century posited that part of the reason why humanity was like doing poorly as a species was that we'd all become too alienated from our labor. So he's kind of have to figure he's like a Marxist of some variety.
Yeah, or a Marxist autonomous. Yeah. So,
he basically points out one thing I did find kind of funny was the idea that like it would take another like 2 centuries for people to point this out. But basically like Delany kind of points to this very mid-century conception of like middle-class intellectual labor where, he talks about like a guy who like works for a button factory and he spends all day like reading outputs on a computer to like figure out like how many buttons to sell.
Yeah.
And how that basically like drives you crazy eventually because you're so alienated, like you're not doing anything. You're just reading a computer and like responding to what the computer tells you.
Your email job. Yeah.
Basically. And so based on this idea, Sawton is the inventor who then invents these cybernetic sockets we've talked about that allow you to directly interface with your technology. And we're told that this technology basically is almost completely unquestioningly like adopted by the majority of the population within a few years, and B, that it has stopped all war.
Yeah, and I think like something else, right? As a result of it too. Like I don't remember what else, but
so
maybe it was like sickness too. Maybe not.
I don't know if that's directly tied to it, but yes, sickness has basically been eradicated in this universe. But I think that this is very so. Again, I'm not 100% sure what Delany's saying here.
Under this system, much of the endemic mental illness caused by feelings of alienation left society. This transformation turned war from a rarity to an impossibility. Because I guess presumably everybody's production levels went through the roof and they didn't need to fight other people to get more production.
Oh, see, that's not how I read it. I read it as you don't want to go to war if you have to feel the violence that you are doing and is being done to you in such a visceral way with like modern like weapons.
I mean, that also like I could see that just as well. Like you would physically feel like the tank getting shot if you're plugged into it or something. Yeah.
I don't know if it could be both. It might not be either, or it might be both and.
Yeah.
But it's something I find very like this genuinely feels like the part of the book that feels the most cryptic to me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because the like world of work Delany is referring to is so alien to me in a way. Like, I don't know, the reading the outputs on the button computer doesn't sound that bad to me.
Yeah,
especially if you're able to support a whole family on the one income of being the butt. Because like a big part of what he says is that the fact that the button guy is not expending any energy is like why he's alienated. Like the fact that it's so passive. He makes another note of like a guy who works in a factory who just comes in, turns on the machines, and like goes to sleep through a shift, and then turns everything off when he leaves for the night.
Yeah, they're like, that's bad. Yeah,
that's bad. It's way better if you're plugged into the factory machines and like you're controlling everything with your hands.
Well, yeah, because I guess the idea is that it would feel so good that you would be like doing like a flow state or something. Like, yeah.
Like I can kind of see that, but I almost wonder if there's something more sinister at work here. So, I mean, I do think that it is of note that it does seem like he is correct about there being no war.
Right. Yeah.
Like when I say that the Draco Federation is going to overtake the Pleiadians, it's not because of like they're not going to militarily conquer them. It's just that like the economics are working out in such a way because Delany's very upfront that like the most important fact in this universe is like the ability to transport things across space.
Right.
Which you need Illyrion for, etc.
Shipping.
So it does seem like there's no chance of a war breaking out. It's purely economic.
Yeah.
And even again, the warfare that Lork Van Ray is going to wage is purely economic. He's not going to kill anybody if he doesn't have to. There's not going to be like a big gun. Like it's literally just I'm going to crash. I'm going to flood the global market with Lyrion so that the Red family has their financial fortunes destroyed and the Draco Federation with them. But I also kind of wonder because again, this is another thing with kind of some of these new wave stories. This is another thing with Alfred Bester and Stars My Destination. They posit worlds where there's still capitalism, or at least there's still rich people. The fact of the matter is we clearly see there are still laborers in this world. There's still an immense proletarianized humanity that has to work for a living, and if anything is significantly worse off than now. In a lot of ways, say what you will about your email job, you are not going to go mad from looking at
sun.
Looking at the sun through your cyber eyes in your spaceship.
Was there? I don't know if there was any money in this book, right? Or was there money?
I mean, I think that
wages. I guess.
I don't recall anyone. I don't remember what they used to buy anything, but there might have. Yeah, well, I mean, theoretically, I feel like it might be just that everything is paid for more or less in Illyrion, because I feel when they're signing on for the expedition, Van Lork, it's kind of again like Moby Dick, where it's you're getting a portion of a percentage of what we take. Okay,
because I think that's what it is. And now that I think about it, when Mouse is talking to that guy that runs that dockside cafe. The people pay with physical money when they buy fish that the guy fries. So I guess there still is physical money, but I think you're right. When he's signing aboard the ship, they're getting Illyrion to sell, basically. Yeah.
But I also wonder if this the alienate, the quote unquote lack of alienation, basically is again, I'm wondering if the idea is basically that Ashton Clark is a Marxist philosopher, and people read his work and they're oh, if we just solve alienation, then all this exploitation is fine.
That's a good point. Or I also feel there's something kind of interesting about removing the distance. It's you have distance from the thing you're doing. So if you're plugged into it, the distance is gone and then it's great. As opposed to also remember that side story about people getting tricked into working in the colonies? Mm-hmm. Where they would trick you into signing up to be in a work camp for the outer colonies, basically, and it apparently sucks if you end up doing that, but then they don't really say anything else.
Yeah. So yeah, it's this thing that feels it feels very strange, because it does seem like Delany does see a lot of potential in this technology. Again, it's the thing that sort of brings humanity together and creates this kind of culture that has allowed for other developments in art and in mysticism. But it all I don't know, there was something about it that felt just a little sinister to me, and I found myself wondering why are the Romani so resistant to this technology?
Well, and they're only really described as being backwards or reactionary or something. But
yeah, or even again, just why is this preferable? I guess I didn't quite buy the argument that is made for it as a way to like prevent alienation.
Yeah, John. Instead, it's like, you know, with the psychodrama that we have now, it's like, hey, don't you want to plug in to find out what's happening on the other side of the globe right now? like you won't be alienated because you won't be bored. You'll be able to see what's going on over there. And it's like, actually, that's too much. Like, we don't need to, you know, like the effect of that is like wrecking havoc. So,
well, one thing I did find myself thinking about when I was reading this was, you know, I do think there is a way in which it kind of does like predict something of the internet. But there's also this thing I find that, again, I like about this older science fiction. I guess like science fiction kind of pre-Neuromancer probably,
yeah,
is this idea that like, oh, technology is going to make the real world a more interesting place to live. Like people are going to, yeah, have new technology and they're going to use it to like invent new musical instruments and, you know, do things in real life.
Yeah.
Like we're going to have spaceship races rather than just what we have in reality, which is, oh, we're going to have a video game of a spaceship race. Not to again get into like the good analog versus the bad digital, but that did feel like a little evocative of that dichotomy to me.
Right, or like the Syrinx, the thing that can play like images as well as music. Like, yeah, it's like that would be awesome, but
well, even just like the idea that like, oh, people like want to go to this party in France rather than, but like no one is like plugged in and just like scrolling feeds.
That's true. There. I don't even know if there's like they didn't even talk about like news or like if there's like the equivalent of like a news feed.
Well, theoretically, like there's the psychoramas, but it feels like it's more bounded.
Yeah.
Like it's not like a thing you can necessarily like spend all day on or let people want to do that. It feels more like a movie,
right? Yeah,
where it's like, oh, you go and do this, and then you leave, and you know you get back to real life.
But yeah, the idea of technology like facilitating human interaction and activity as opposed to limiting it or just doing a version of what you already do, but with technology, something like that.
Well, again, I guess that's the whole idea is like, oh, we're de-alienating by doing this. It's like we're doing digital technology, but in real life.
Yeah, Delany's like the words IRL were removed. Yeah, like it's like everything was in real life, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I have like a final place I come down on this because it is clearly very important to the novel, but it's in a way that it feels very tied up in everything else in a way that makes it very hard to kind of draw like a conclusion to this.
It also should be noted that a lot of the details are provided at the end of the book, like that some of the stuff is hinted at, but when you get the full Ashton Clark explanation, it's like towards the back chapter, I would say, like the last chapter of the book.
Yeah.
Well, and so should we mention plot stuff, how that shakes out? Because I do want to mention that.
No, absolutely. I feel like we should do that, and then we can get to the ending.
So, well, I mean, there's the bit where they go to that like archive, right?
Yeah, I feel like we can kind of yada yada.
Yeah, they go to
it's
an
interesting,
archive,
but it's not important. I feel like there's nothing in there that we haven't kind of talked around in terms of the broader themes. So they find out where they need to go.
They find out where they need to go. There's a great scene where the mouse smokes weed bliss with Lork von Ray, and the mouse gets like this nice like stoned monologue, and the mouse is like, what are you talking about? And Lork von Ray goes in very 60s term, you're rapping, mouse. like you're going on like a big speech, you're hogging the bowl, like you're microphoning. But I really do like Mouse's little speech, because he says at one point, I flagged it, he says when he's talking about playing the Syrinx, sure, the past is what makes now like now makes tomorrow, Captain. There's a river crashing by us, but we can only go down to drink one place, and it's called now. I play my Syrinx C, and it's like an invitation for everybody to come down and drink. And I think that's kind of like a little Delany being like, I also want this to happen when you read this book, is you think about like the now and how you experience life, and like art can do that. And I think that's a nice little bit that the mouse gets, because normally he doesn't talk that much, but him getting stoned is nice, and he gets like a big monologue. So then the prince and Ruby Red show up, and they try to kill Lork von Ray to finish the job, because they figured out that he's going to fly into the sun to get the Illyrion and bankrupt their family. And then Lork von Ray uses Mouse's Syrinx to like blind and burn both of the twins. Like by using the technology to like shoot like hot rays at them, and like it like lights Ruby Red on fire, and it like severely like sends like sonic beams at Prince. So they get disfigured, then they like run away, and then they're flying towards the sun. At which point I'm a little fuzzy, but at one point like Lork von Ray just ends up on Prince's and Ruby Red's ship as they're like orbiting outside of this sun that's about to go nova.
Yeah. So they like get to the star they know is going to go nova, but they don't know when it's going to. Like he's like, there's like a 2-week like window we have. We need to be prepared to like act quickly when it happens. And then the princes show back up. One thing I really like in this bit is that Prince is like on life support more or less. Like he apparently like maybe like actually did die, depending on kind of how this all works in this universe, but he's in like this life support tube, and Delany keeps like referring to him as the corpse. He's like, the corpse spoke and said this in this way that was just felt very cool. Also
kind of Darth Vader-y when they show Darth Vader like not wearing the robot. I also thought of that, but I
thought of that too. But Lork ends up on their ship, the Black Cockatoo.
What a name.
His ship is called the Rock, ROC, like the big bird. I don't think we've mentioned that, but that's a very cool name for a spaceship. As is the Black Cockatoo, but that feels much more, it feels like an evil it feels like a Dick Dastardly ass ship name.
The evil bird.
But he ends up on this ship, and the sun goes nova. And like Lork von Ray more or less is able to like take control of the ship, or I can't remember if he takes control of the ship or just because of like they're not paying attention. Like the ship is caught in like the gravity of the nova. And so he gets this great like monologue where he's basically telling them that they're going to die. And like the twins are like freaking out because again, they unlike Lork, they don't have this higher calling. They're here just to kill him, to preserve like their power, their privilege. Lork, yes, he wants revenge. He wants to bring down this corrupt system, but he also has this higher spiritual calling to the Grail. He is the Grail Knight. And so, he's prepared to die to like see his goal through to the end, to see like the face of God in the supernova. But like the twins are like freaking out, like they're screaming and crying, and literally like, I guess somehow like he's in the tank, but like his robot arm is like somehow attached on the outside, so he can still like interact with things on the outside world. Princes, and he like basically bashes open the tank so that he'll die faster. Because he's so like freaked out because like Lork is like, you're gonna die slower because you're in liquid. You're gonna like watch your sister die as you're like as you just start to boil to death. It's so good.
And like he's like fighting Ruby Red, and then like all of her fake skin comes off after being burned. It's like it's almost like a little body horror. Like it's very graphic.
Super body horror.
It's like this very graphic.
Yes. And we then kind of transport. We don't. Lork doesn't transport. We change kind of narrative streams. We're back on the other ship, where more or less like they see this happening. Catton is plugged into the ship. He like has like his eyes on the nova. He like sees the Black Cockatoo start to go into the sun. They all think the captain is dead, and they start like zipping off because they're like, we gotta get out of here. Like we don't have what it takes to like see the quest through to the end on our own.
Yeah.
We've kind of lost like the will without the captain here.
Yeah.
Very classic kind of seafaring stuff. Catton like looks into the Nova and it seems like he is going mad. And then, you know, we have a chapter cut off and we open back up and, you know, we're back in Catton's head and he wakes up and he realizes that he can see. Because the first thing that happens when you look at the Nova is you go blind.
Right.
And he realized like, oh, okay, I might have like scraped through this. We find out that basically because they were going away from the Nova versus into it, like he was basically like Odysseus, like lashed to the mast, like he.
Well, and I think doesn't Mouse like cut his feet at one point too? Like Mouse also helps. Yeah.
Yeah, but more or less, like he got like a taste of this thing, but like he didn't get the full like force of it the way that like Dan did at the beginning, and so he's more or less okay. He's clearly been like changed by this experience. Yeah. But he's alive. We also find out that Lork lived. The lady kind of gives like some bullshit physics for like, because like the star is like a ball, but then when it becomes Nova, it turns torus. Into like a torus, which I guess is like a donut shape. Yeah. And so like he was like use that change of shape to like fling himself out of like the orbit of the star
and pick up all the Illyrian while he's there. Yeah. Yeah.
Not all the Illyrian. Yeah. Because he then says like, yeah, basically like there's so much Illyrian in this like donut shape that people can just come here and take as much as they need.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, he's succeeded. He's been like fucked up. Like he apparently like they talk about like his skin like separating in agony. Yeah. Because he's presumably just been like burned to shit. But he survived and he accomplished his goal, and it does seem like this transformation of galactic society that he wanted to see is going to happen.
Which is when Caton's like, we're at a point of history now, Mouse, like the change is coming.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because, again, we leave Lork. We have this conversation between Catton and Mouse where they talk about Catton's novel, of all things. Yeah. And Delany leaves us in this super cryptic note where Catton is, you know, he's pulled the Wonder Boys here. He's spent so long just trying to even get started on this novel that it's become like writing the novel has not been his purpose in life. Gathering material to write the novel has been the purpose of his life. Right. And the idea of like actually starting the thing is incredibly intimidating to him, and he can't bring himself to do it. You know, but Mouse is able to convince him like, no, you've gathered like what you need. And we realize like, oh, we're reading the novel that Catton is going to write. Right. Yeah. But Catton also says that, you know, if he actually finishes the book, he won't know what to do with himself. You know, he says he would have to stop himself before he wrote the last.
Then it just ends.
And that's the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's Delany doesn't give us the last word. And that was a bit where I was like, yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, fuck. Yeah. The science fiction can be good literature.
Well, and too, like he says like all of these grail quests were never finished. Like he's talking about all these famous tellings of the grail. It's like anytime they do their version of the grail quest, it's like incomplete or it doesn't end definitively. And well, so
either the person dies or they've changed the story so much that it's not the true mythic cycle.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, the ending in the middle is like a great aesthetic moment. It's a callback to the grail structure. And yeah, it's like you're reading the thing that Caton wrote and then it just ends. I also feel like if he had kept going, it would have been 20 pounds of novel in a 20-pound bag. And I think being able to know that you have better effect with your 5-pound bag, I think is smart play on Delany's point. And I also did find the ending to be very moving, just sort of cut off at the end. And yeah, and now it's like, now you're out of it. Like it ended in the right spot.
Well, you know, I feel like there's something I don't know, maybe of a piece with our show in it in terms of the beautiful thing about art is that it is infinite.
Yeah.
The fact that we can always be recombining these images and these archetypes in so many different ways. The fact that, a story ends, but it doesn't really end. You can read it again. You can think about what happens after that. You can write your own story, based on what you thought of the book you just read or the movie you just saw. And it does feel like this really powerful thing about, Catton seems to think of writing his novel as something deadly, as something that will take something from him, and in acknowledging the fact that, I mean, it is an ending, but in kind of acknowledging the fact that the ending isn't the end.
Stuff goes on. Yeah.
That there is like an infinite amount of possibility that comes like after the ending or within the ending. It's like this quantum state of like art.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I really like.
Well, and too, it tracks with the idea that these stories go on, even if the particulars are bounded by time or place, or they just like don't complete. And so like, yeah, it's like the Grail story is going to get retold in another version after this one, even if the specifics of this one end suddenly.
Well, I think there's almost like a mystical point to it too, because I think the idea he's saying is that what makes like the true mysticism is the mystery of it. The fact that you can't actually get to the end of the Grail quest because like the end of the Grail quest is God, like it's the infinite.
Yeah.
It's like this asymptotic thing where you can get ever closer to it, but you can never actually reach it. And in this, the same way, like the ending of the story, like is the same, like this story is the same.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I like it. There's a lot to chew on there, but I thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's the right ending for the story as well. Like it fits like the aesthetic purpose like perfectly.
Yeah. I did find myself almost wishing there was a little more here. Like I really just wish I could have spent more time with the characters.
Oh, the characters are great. Because
this feels like I found myself thinking a little bit about this book versus a book we read a while back for the show, The Dragon Waiting.
Yeah.
Which probably came out, like 15 years after this, I think. But that's a book where again it's drawing very much on kind of this D&D party kind of vibe where part of the fun is just seeing the characters bounce off each other and feeling like you're kind of like watching this friend group develop. And I felt like this book almost had that potential, but just didn't quite have enough room to get there. Like the fact that there's like 4 members of the crew that we really don't get very much of.
The background characters.
Like they kind of feel a little wasted.
Like it could have just been Kate and Mouse and the captain, and we didn't need Sebastian and Ty and the twins.
Well, because like Ty is really there just to read the tarot cards, and Sebastian is there because at one point, like one of his pets like saves them from the Reds. And so they feel very functional. And
Sebastian's like, I read books. Like he says he's read books and then that's it. So
yeah, but he doesn't ever participate in these conversations.
Yeah.
And then like the twins just kind of like give us an idea of like what life in the outer colonies is like, which is fine. Like it helps us understand like why Lork's like crusade like has this like emancipatory element to it, because like the outer colonies mine Illyrian, like it's the only place where Illyrian naturally occurs. So like by him tipping over this this galactic economy, like the people working in those work camps are now free as well. We didn't mention that. But they feel like again, it's a cool set of characters. You have like an albino twin and a black twin, and there's a triplet somewhere. We don't know what he looks like.
Yeah, the lost brother. Yeah.
So there are these characters who feel really evocative, feel really interesting, but we just don't quite get to spend enough time with them. And I do wish that maybe we gotten like a little bit more room to breathe there.
Well, yeah,
Though I think
yeah.
from like a plot standpoint, I think there's like enough here. Like I didn't want just more plot.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I feel like it dispenses with a lot of the background buildings romance so that you can get like just the plot. So I did want to mention, I think the little monologue that the captain delivers as he basically rides the ship into the sun is a pretty great example of some of Delany's more poetic stuff. And I won't read the whole thing, but I will say at this bit, I have struck down 1/3 the cosmos to raise up another and let one more go staggering, and I feel no sin on me. Then it must be that I am free and evil. Well, then I am free, mourning her with my laughter. Mouse, Caton, you who can speak out of the net, which one of you is the blinder for not having watched me win under this sun? I can feel fire churn by me. Like you, dead Dan, I will grasp at dawn and evening, but I will win the noon.
Ooh.
It's like pretty poetic, powerful stuff. And I
actually got chills when you read that.
And he saves it for like the penultimate moment of like right before he drives it into the sun. Like it's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels very Ahab.
Yeah, yeah. Also, you who can speak out of the net, who do you think that is? Do you think that's like the reader?
I mean, maybe. I wonder if that's almost more of a practical question in terms of like who's like able to talk through like the internal communications channel they have open or something.
Actually,
like
that's probably what it is, because he talks about the net. But they talk about the net in that one section as like a metaphor for like life. It's like you're in the net, like it contains everything.
Well, maybe it's like God.
Oh man, it's probably maybe that then. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of again this again if the net is this thing that is connects everyone and has again kind of invented this culture. You know, maybe it's like the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's interesting.
But yeah, just a great like Ahab monologue as he drives I am not, I feel there's no sin on me. Like, this is the thing I must do.
Yeah. Oof. I don't know. I really like this book. I actually am really excited to do some more Delany in the future. You know, either for the show or in my personal reading. What if we read Tides of Lust, Ben?
Yeah, we can see when Delany's working in full pornography mode. Like, yeah. Wikipedia says about Tides of Lust, it's like the characters are mostly fixated on obtaining their own sexual satisfactions or something, like the idea that like the plot would involve getting your rocks off. Like, so
I do like that the subtitle for the Tides of Lust is An Adventure in the Sexual Unknown.
I think when Sam was on the show, he had said maybe Stars in My Pocket. Like he said that was a good one. Yeah. I'll friend of the pod, Sam. I'll pick his brain for more Delany.
Yeah, I think I definitely want to check out. I think it's called Trouble on Triton, which is like his response to the Dispossessed.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that.
Basically, why don't people in the Dispossessed fuck?
But they do. I mean, okay. There's one Wait,
why aren't they horny, Ben?
Well, they're not horny because like there's no sexual like. I feel like the sex is in the book, but it's like it's very minimal compared to everything else. Like I think he has like a one night stand and it goes perfectly fine because everybody has fine sexual mores on the moon, and then he has really good sex with his wife after he doesn't see her for a while. And I think those are like the two sex scenes in the Dispossessed. So it sounds like Delany is bringing his own particular preoccupations to bear on the idea of collectivist society.
Yeah, the Freudian libido.
Also, like in Dahlgren, I had mentioned this before the recording, but there is a meticulously described three-way in Dahlgren, which is not exactly satisfying. And then there's three of the characters have a three-way that's not described, and the narrator says it was the best sex of their lives. like so. But
All right, Ben. Well, anything else you want to say on this book before we wrap it up for the evening?
Definitely read Delany. Like I said, I feel like in the two books I've read, they've always been overflowing with stuff. And yeah, if not all of it is perfectly bow tightened, like with the alienation labor discussion that we talked about, it's still really aesthetically satisfying. And again, like the charge of modernism is in a lot of Delany's stuff, but it's not like, fully self-serious, which I think is important.
Yeah, he definitely has like a sense of humor, which I appreciate about his work. Fascinating guy. He's still alive, which is cool. He's like in his 80s. I think he's still, I don't know. Oh, it looks like the last thing he published was in 2022.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if he's like still working now, like 3 years later, but, from what I can tell, he's actually like, he's a guy who's been very generous with his time and his talents. I know he's done tons of interviews with people. He's been like interviewed with like the Paris Review. He's worked with like comic book artists. So he's one of those guys where it's like, if you want to get into him, like there's a lot to get into and enjoy. And I don't know, I have a lot of respect for authors who are clearly so ambitious, and yeah, never seem to give up on what they want to do and don't rest on their laurels. So, he could easily, have finished with Nova and probably, been fine, but he kept pushing the boundaries. So I'm really excited to read more of him in the future.
Yeah, same.
All right. Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us this evening or day or whenever it is that you're listening. Because podcasts are not bound in time, unlike many forms of art. But this was the last episode, like I said, of this season. So we will have a new season introduction coming up here soon with our reading schedule.
It's going to be great.
In the interest of letting you guys know, a big part of next season is we're going to be doing kind of a read through of 2666 over the course of a couple of weeks. So our next episode is actually going to be the first leg of that. We're going to be reading parts 1 and 2 of 2666 by Roberto Bolaño.
So that's the part about the critics and then the part about Alma Fitano. So it's like a nice, I think like maybe like 160, 200 page chunk. I think it's around 200 pages. Because 2666 is a big book, but I'm super excited to break it down in chunks because there's so much there. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be my first time through it, so I'm really excited. And I know that we have people who do read along with us, at least, when a book strikes their fancy. So just in case it takes us a little longer to get that new season announcement out, I didn't want to leave you guys high and dry since I know that is a big pull. But we will see you guys here in 2 weeks for that. Until then, enjoy the start of summer here and Semper Books.
Semper Books.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.